Okay, so I'm Martin. I work for a company called Microsoft. You might have heard of us. Yeah. Now, today I'm going to be talking for about 45 minutes on IE9 and a little bit about our history and the story of IE9 from my perspective. I was going to then show 10 minutes worth of demos using the browser, but to be honest, given that we've not really got a great connectivity here, that might be skipped, and we might just go straight on to some questions. And I'll try and answer any questions that you have as honestly and as openly as possible. Obviously, I do have a job that I need to keep, so I might have some restrictions on that. But one of the things that I like to try and do with anything that I say is keep it honest and try and remove a lot of the marketing BS. And if anyone's been at my talks before, I hope that that's the sort of message that I deliver and the way that it comes across. If I do have lots of marketing BS, then please, heckle me. Oh, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm the Beebs. I'd say you probably should follow me. I'm a very interesting read. I go to lots of events. This is very dark. This is me at an event. And lots of people kind of will want to shout at me, and I can kind of really understand why they would want to shout at me. I just want to first sort of set the scene. I've only worked for Microsoft for 1 year, so I wasn't responsible for any of the previous IE browsers. I didn't write any code for IE6. In fact, I don't write any code for any of the browsers, because what I do is I evangelize IE9 HTML5. In fact, I evangelize or talk about on Microsoft's behalf the whole of the web. So I talk about server-side programming as well as front-end and browsers and all that sort of stuff. So a little bit about me, just to give you an idea of who I am and what I've done. I started programming the web when I was 16 years old, which is, 1999? Don't work out how old I am. That's not a good thing. And this was my very first website. It was called Kill Haribo. And the idea of the game was that you had Haribo there, and you'd have all the links, and it would suggest where you'd want to go in this story, and you'd kind of progress in this story of whether or not you would make Haribo the greatest child genius that ever lived, or end up with his death based upon a drug problem that he had. And so you could do things like you could compliment him on his fringe, make fun of his shoes, say his sign looks like a number plate, and you could just interact with this. And all it was really was just link after link to static HTML pages. And it was my first sort of introduction to the web. And everything about that I learned completely by looking at Yahoo. I know you'd be amazed by looking at the sort of design ability right there, but that's actually a mock-up that I did in PowerPoint. That's not the actual site. You'll be sad to hear. I can't find the original. But it was this idea that you could, take a website like Yahoo, view the source, and figure out how they did it. And that kind of inspired me to get started with the web. And it's something which I really think is extraordinarily important going forwards with the web. And I remember the first time because that kind of worked for a long time, going through, looking at the source, figuring out how something worked, tearing it apart. And I kind of got onto WebMonkey and stuff like that and figured out how tables worked and forms worked. And then I came to this little thing, it was a page a little bit like this, which I think it was channel4.com had. And basically you'd fill in various variables, like things like your best friend's name, your first pet, your favorite color, or a local nightclub. And you'd write that stuff in. And then you'd submit it off to the website, and it would come back with like a completed letter or a completed article which had all those variables in that. And that was like mind-blowing at the time. It's like, how do they do that? How do they take those variables? Because I hadn't had any idea about server-side programming languages or anything. To me, this form tag right here, that createLetter.cgi that was it. I didn't understand where that went. I didn't understand there was a server behind it. To me, it was all just magic. Black magic. And I think sometimes for developers which are new to the web or are starting now, they have the ability to view source, look at new things, understand how Ajax works client-side. So much stuff happens client-side rather than server-side nowadays. And I think it's a shame a little bit that when they come to something like Flash or Silverlight, that they're not really able to dig in and understand how that works. And that's one of the sort of key drivers for me for HTML5. It's not necessarily standards for me, or it's not necessarily trying to kill anything. It's just so that people can understand how things work in a much easier way. So sort of talks a little bit about who I am and where I've come from. I used to work for an e-commerce company called SystemX. We're the largest e-retailer, and that's where I sort of built my reputation as a half-decent developer. I'm generally a server-side developer, not a front-side or client-side developer. And when I came to Microsoft, one of the first things that I asked the question was, well, why do we still build a browser? And it's a question which I'm almost asked every time I go to an event. It's like, why don't you just use WebKit? Why don't you just start again? Why do you keep releasing a damn browser every 3 years? Give up and die. Well, the response that I get back is often this. Well, the browser is the most used application on the PC. And if we want to create an experience and make sure we experience the best delivery of the web, then we have to have some involvement in that browser. We have to understand how it works, or we have to move that forwards ourselves. And obviously, our browser can be controlled centrally. So for lots of our enterprise companies, which is where we make a lot of our money, it's really important that we have a browser that we can control centrally from our server ecosystem. So I don't know if you know, but Internet Explorer has 1,500 different hooks that a server admin can centrally administer across their network. And it's one of the main reasons why Internet Explorer is still so popular in the enterprise. It isn't because they're just stupid or Luddites. It's because they are kind of comfortable with what they have. They don't necessarily need to go to YouTube. They don't necessarily need the latest and greatest things in their browsers. They just need to make sure that their internal applications work. And as far as the admins are concerned, you know, IE8 probably fits their purposes fine. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, just stating it, by the way. And obviously, for them, it's like one change in a browser can cause irreparable damage to their business. So one change in a browser could one change in a browser could cause 1 billion defects on the web. So it's really important that not only we kind of control, at least on Windows, our own ecosystem for the web, or we have some control over it, but also that we take that responsibility that we have seriously. And I don't think perhaps in previous versions of our browser we have taken that responsibility to the web. If we say, well, we want to be in control of our browser, when we have to make it interoperable, we have to make it so that it works with other people's HTML on different platforms and different systems. And it's really important that we don't break the web. And that's sort of the ethos behind HTML5, the fact that we can all move to this better world where we can do much more stuff in the browser, and we can build better websites. We can make better looking websites without the requirement for plugins. But it's important to make sure that even though those people in enterprises might not be the most forward-thinking people, that we still look after them. And it's Microsoft's responsibility as people who sell them software and take money from them to look after them in that way. And that's just the perspective that someone from Microsoft will have when they're talking about browsers and why we build a browser. So,
for the last 10 years, in my opinion, Microsoft have consistently got it right.
Internet Explorer has been unbelievable because it's so good. What else can I say?
Do they really think that we're going to prefer other browsers? No way.
Internet Explorer set the standards for other browsers. It's a legacy that will not die.
Visually, IE6 set new expectations about the way the web should look. Then IE7 brought along transparent PNGs. And I just said, wow.
There's been a complete lack of problems and frustrations.
And Microsoft giving us the support all the bloody time.
I've always found it plays nicely.
It really is inexplicable how its performance set such a high expectation.
Ridiculously great is how I describe their efforts to date.
I haven't got a bad thing to say
about the old Internet Explorer. Big round of applause.
Round of applause, I like that. I wasn't expecting that. I don't know if you can see this little tattoo, but does anyone know from the, like, is it Mogwai? But when he turns bad, does he change his name? Or is it always Mogwai, is that right? It's been a long time since I watched this film. The little cute one, right? And he turns bad, like in one of the Gremlins episodes. Sorry?
It's not halfway in between. He's not quite the Gremlin yet, is he?
Well, what this is a picture of a tattoo that someone got done on their leg. One of my friends on Facebook. Jesus Christ, I know these people. And
How you friendly?
I hope he's not watching this as well. Like, you'd be like, what little bastard? How do I went to school with him? But he done this in Vegas, I believe, like from what I've seen on his Twitter stream, on his Facebook stream, and like, it made me think a little bit about how we maybe approached our previous browsers, because he probably got drunk in Vegas, and he probably went to his mates, "It'll be a wicked idea if I got a tattoo of a gremlin on my leg." And Neville went, "Yeah, be a great idea," and they've went down the tattoo parlour and they've got it done. If he'd have consulted more broadly, he wouldn't have had this problem. And that's one of the issues that we have with our previous incarnations of our browser. We didn't consult, we didn't listen enough, we didn't hear the feedback which was coming to us. All we did was we bunkered down, we started developing the browser, locked ourselves away, built a browser, 3 years later pop out and wonder why no one's getting excited about web slicers or accelerators. Because we weren't fixing the problems that they were telling us about. And I think that's something which we've tried to change in IE9. So for those that don't know, I imagine that many of you are using Macs and so forth, and IE9 doesn't work on Mac, so you probably or may not have had the opportunity to play around with it. But so that you're aware of how we build the browser, we have 3 main channels for ways in which you can get hold of Internet Explorer. We have what we call platform previews. We have html5labs.com, and then we have our released version of the browser. That's the browser which you would download from sort of Beauty of the Web. So the platform previews are just like Chromeless browsers. They don't have any buttons on them, any address bar. And we ship them every 8 to 12 weeks, or at least we have since IE9. And what that gives us the opportunity to do is to get feedback from the community. And it was something which was really successful in terms of getting feedback. We had like something around 40 million downloads of our platform previews whilst we were doing this stuff. And I think it kind of changed from, there was a leadership change in terms of our relationship with the W3C. In fact, Paul Cotton went to the HTML5 working group and headed that up. And ever since then, we've realized that we don't only have to sort of talk about standards every 3 years and say, yay, we're supporting new standards. We actually have to demonstrate it. And we also have to get feedback. And the platform previews was our way, initially, of doing that, but maintaining a stable branch of our browser. So the aspiration is that developers will use this channel. We don't have the idea that, we don't have the same sort of ecosystem that Chrome have or Firefox have where we have nightlies or anything like that. So this was our sort of in-between ground, a way that we could give developers sort of information about new browser features which were coming. We then have HTML5 Labs. And this is our place where we store early prototypes of our browser. They're kind of, and they are complete prototypes. They're not our finished implementations, nor are they even done natively in many cases. A lot of these are like Silverlight shims to just make it work or make it appear to work. But it gives the people, it gives developers the opportunity to browse, to use them and to work against them. Now, anything that we put on HTML5 Labs isn't guaranteed to be in the next version of our browser, whereas everything in the platform previews generally is going to be in our next browser. So every feature that we added during those 8 to 12 week cycles ended up inside of IE9. And currently on HTML5 Labs, we have IndexedDB, which is the sort of database storage, or the in-browser database sort of keyed storage. We have WebSockets, and we've recently updated that to the WebSocket 07 protocol specification, so it's in line, I believe, with Firefox. We also have a file API up there, and we have the media capture API up there as well. So it's kind of this balancing act of where we're different from other browsers in that we don't put this stuff, or we're not putting this stuff in our browser. And you can kind of debate both ways, and I don't necessarily think it's the best way that we're doing this right now, and I'd really like to get your opinion on how we could do that better, and if we should just put the model of putting all this new stuff straight in our browser. The risk we run if we do that sort of stuff is that lots of developers aren't quite as savvy as probably the people in this room, and if we put stuff in browsers, people expect it to be the actual finished article, or they should go ahead and use it. And often is the case is that we're not done, we're not finished with those specifications, and we know they're not ready for public consumption. And obviously we have our fully released browser, and this is the sort of stable implementations of what we've got. And my argument for doing it the way that we do it and not putting implementations in the browser earlier is, I think that a no implementation is better than a bad one. And what I mean by that is, if, say, we don't support text shadow, for example, at the moment. It's a CSS3 feature which is highly, highly requested, but we don't support it. For whatever reason during our planning process, we said, you know, there's something which was more important than that, and that fell off for the cutoff point for IE9. But had we have said, well, lots of people are asking for it, we know we've got this version, but it's not maybe fully tested or it's not quite ready, but we'll stick it in there anyway, because we can then appease people. The fact is, like, that's going to be there forever. We can't go back and take that away. We don't have an update mechanism in the same way as Chrome does. We have standard shippable releases, 9, 8, 7. They go out as a version number, and if it's broken forever. So if we were to put bad specifications or bad implementations of those specifications, then it would make everyone's life harder, because not only can you, when you're doing feature detection, you can no longer rely on, does it support text shadow? Because if it supports text shadow, but it's a crappy version of text shadow, you have to then start adding, well, if IE will do this, or we won't do this. That's a kind of argument, that's a philosophical argument in many ways, and I'd love to get your opinions on my take on that, because I'm sure there's people with different opinions to that. Maybe we should ship earlier, or maybe we should just get it right and get it earlier. I don't know, but that's the reality of it. So I'm going to just take you through some of the things that we had in our platform previews. So the first platform preview came about in March 2010. It was released at the Mix conference. It's a conference we have every year in Las Vegas. I think we held it in Las Vegas just so that we can have a bit of a knees up. But it's a bit like Google I/O, or has anyone ever been to Mix? Has everyone ever been to Google I/O? Just one. It's similar to Google I/O, which none of you have been to, so won't have experienced. On stage, Dean Karmovich, who is the vice president for Internet Explorer and has been for quite some time, said, look, we're trying to do things slightly differently. We want to give developers insight and feedback into how we're building a browser. Now, they'd already be actually bunkered down since IE8's release and were working on IE9. So there was a gap between when we released IE8, and when we released IE9. Some considerable gap where people were like, well, what are you guys doing behind the scenes? And we would kind of mutter, well, we're doing better stuff with standards, we're doing this, that, and the other. But it was that point, March 2010, was the first time that we publicly said, this is what we've done, have a look at it, go play, tell us what's wrong with it. And we had things like CSS3 border radius and selectors in there. We also had SVG, and it was hardware accelerated. And we had a new JavaScript engine. Everyone's got a new JavaScript engine, but we had one in as well. And we had a commitment there to say, every 8 weeks we're going to rev this. We're going to make this better every single 8 weeks. We're going to fix bugs. And we had an ACID score of 55 out of 100 when we first released. Now, I'm putting this ACID score there. I know it's no real sort of guide of how well we have implemented. It doesn't really say that we've got standards sorted in any respect. I'm not trying to pretend that it is. I just think it gives you a good guide for how we've progressed, or how we progressed through the process. So the next version, we put in CSS3 media queries. And for those that don't know, that's the ability to do lots of things. We've had media queries for a long time, being able to support print style sheets, but the ability to react to the size of the browser which comes to you. So you can say things, you can run different if statements or different queries to say, well, not if statements, but queries to say, if it's a really large experience, deliver this style sheet, but if it's a really small screen experience, perhaps on a mobile, deliver this experience, or deliver this CSS. We introduced hardware accelerated HTML5. Again, we improved JavaScript speed, and that was like a consistent thing we did. In almost every platform preview, our JavaScript started getting slightly faster. And if you'll have seen our JavaScript speed in IE8, you know there's only really one way to go, and that's faster. So next up was our platform preview in June 2010. We introduced Canvas, and that was a big shock because no one really thought that we were going to do Canvas. It was like an Apple thing or WhatWG thing. There was no way that we were going to actually go ahead and put that in our browser. And I think that was the turning point when people started saying, hold on, they're actually taking things a little bit more serious than they used to. Like, they recognize that HTML5 specification has to be implemented in our browser if we want it to be half decent. So we started supporting big features, more like Canvas, video, and audio. We also supported web fonts, web open font format, so that people can embed fonts in a much simpler way in our browser. We also did a lot of stuff around JavaScript standardization and started getting quite serious on ECMA's specification for JavaScript. And our ACID 3 score shot up to 83 out of 100. Platform Preview 4, August 2010. We started thinking about JavaScript in a different way, and we looked around at other competitors and what they were doing, and most of them were kind of including their JavaScript engine in the core of their browser natively. Prior to that, Internet Explorer took their JavaScript engine and treated it in the same way as they did their VB script engine. They put it over here, and there was a COM interop between the two. So our browser spoke via COM to JavaScript and spoke via COM for VB script. Now in the days of IE6, that was cool because we treated VB script and JavaScript the same. But I think things have changed a little bit. I don't think there's many VB script programmers out there anymore. So we felt it was probably the best decision to do what other browsers have done, which is to make it native. Remove that latency which you have with the COM talks. We still have that latency if you're doing VB, but in JavaScript, that's kind of like a first-class citizen in our browser now, and it has been since August 2010. We also done things around audio, video, text, and graphics and made them hardware accelerated. And hardware accelerated is like a really marketing bullshit word, which basically means we've probably used some more of the power that we weren't previously using. So hardware accelerated in terms of JavaScript means that we're using multi-core. Hardware accelerated in terms of video means we're using the GPU. Hardware accelerated in terms of text means that we're doing sub-pixel rendering to make it smoother. And we also hardware render audio as well, basically passing that off to a subsystem in the operating system to make sure that it's higher fidelity and better quality. And we got up to our highest score in ACID 3, which is 95 out of 100. And that's where we stopped. We couldn't go any higher because if we did, we'd had to support SVG fonts and SVG animations, two things that we weren't willing to support for whatever reason. I think it was generally down to the fact that most people were saying that in the community that it wasn't probably the right way to go. There were probably things that we didn't need to implement. So we were quite happy with a 95 out of 100 score in ACID 3, with the hope that actually we could get SVG fonts removed, those tests actually removed from ACID 3, which is a really cunning way to pass a test, I think, is to try and convince Google to remove the stuff so that you can pass it. But I don't think they will, but I think it's pretty honourable the fact that in such a short space of time, we're talking, 7 months now, we've managed to go from really, really rubbish or poor ACID 3 test scores to really, really good ones. And all the time we're making sure that our implementations are really, really solid, or we're trying to make sure our implementations are solid. And this is one of the kind of marketing bullshit things that we might have put out there as well, which is a really misleading thing that we did. I think it's a little bit misleading, but there is some interesting points about this statistic. So we submitted 2,138 tests to W3C to test the implementation across all browsers. So that because the W3C doesn't have or didn't at that time have a decent test suite. So we released all these tests, our tests, into the W3C. They were accepted, and then we produced this nice little graph which says Internet Explorer 9, Mozilla, Opera, Apple, and Chrome, and then listed all the different things, HTML5, SVG, CSS3, DOM, JavaScript, and then the number of submitted tests, and then our adherence to them. Now clearly, we'd been using these tests internally for some time. So it's kind of expected that we're hitting high numbers here. Other browsers weren't hitting these high numbers, probably because they've not seen these tests before. But the one key point this doesn't, what a lot of people took this to mean, people which weren't that smart took this to mean was HTML5, IE9 is 95% sorted. It's nearly there. We've done HTML5 now. Move on. Let's go to HTML6. Clearly, that's not what it means. It means that 94% of the 99 test cases submitted were passed. We shouldn't underestimate the importance of test cases in the W3C, though. They didn't exist, or they don't really exist even today. There's not that many tests testing specifications at the W3C. And it's a real shame because because it does prove, like, even though these tests, we wrote them, they're still valid tests and they're actually still adhere to the specification. It does show that other browsers' implementations on those specific tests haven't come up to scratch. So that means that there are still implementation issues with every browser. And I'm not suggesting that we're even any higher, we just cover more tests that we submitted. And what I'm saying is that lots of HTML5 stuff, we talk about moving forward, or what's the next big thing in HTML5, or what's the next big feature which is really important. And actually I think we sometimes miss the fact that there's still quite a lot of problems, and we're getting very close to last call on HTML5, which we need to fix. Not only in our implementations, but also in the specification. Oops. So, Platform Preview 5, which is the IE9 beta, shipped September 2010. There was nothing really here for developers specifically. Oh, we're not actually showing you that. Yay! Do you like that little transition, by the way? That's PowerPoint. So Platform Preview 5, IE9 Beta, shipped September 2010. Here we showcased our amazing interface, which was smaller than any interface ever before seen. I think 68 pixels was the height. And we were really quite impressed with this. We told every bloody person it was 64 pixels. The idea that the site should take up more room on the page. And that's kind of a cool thing to say, that's kind of a cool ambition. I think everyone's kind of made that Chrome bar at the top smaller, and I don't think we were the first necessarily to do so. But it's an important thing that we did start looking at our design of the user experience and really take that into consideration, how we could improve that. And we did things like site pinning and tabs as well. We've always done tabs, I mean, but we made the tabs horizontal with the one box, and this one box is a place where you can search and you can put a URL in as well. Brand new features, these, never seen before. I think the only thing really which is revolutionary or completely unique maybe is kind of, to an extent, site pinning, although I would agree that other places have got this too. But the idea that you could take the fav icon, at this point just the fav icon, but that at later points we've done more work on this, but you can take the fav icon of any website and pin it to your taskbar. And then you can right-click that icon on your taskbar and then interact with the website through JavaScript callbacks in the page. And it means that you can do things like pin an audio player or an audio site to your taskbar, and then you can play audio, pause audio, skip directly from the taskbar rather than going directly into the website. And it's doing it all through the use of meta tags to describe this, or a vendor prefix JavaScript API. And lots of people have been using this and implementing it. And we were, obviously, when we launched beta, we'd partner with tons of people to make sure that they'd been putting site pinning on their site. So for people like Facebook, LinkedIn, every Microsoft property, Bing, for example, about something like 200-300 major sites implement site pinning today. So that if you are in Windows 7, you can pin their site to your taskbar, right-click it, and then interact with their site in different and unique ways. That's pretty dark, you can't see it. But IE9, we did a thing where we worked with the gorillas, and I worked with them and implemented the site pinning on their website. And they also did some HTML5 experiences and games for us. And it was kind of my real first experience of doing a HTML. I've done loads of HTML5 tests and games and playing around with it and stuff, but it was the first time I ever put anything in HTML5 in production. And there was lots of, and I didn't actually even put it in production, someone else did. But I mean, it was the first time that I've experienced that whole, the whole sort of, because I'm not a web developer anymore, like I just do this. I just stand up in front of people or blog and stuff. I used to be a professional web developer. I used to have to stay up at night when servers went down and, you know, cry myself to sleep or be sick in a toilet somewhere. But now I just talk, and it was really interesting to see sort of the problems that you face with HTML5 today, and when you have all the sort of spectrum of browsers, how you handle that and how you fall back and how you make sure the experience works for people. And I think when we were beginning to do this, when we were working with partners at the start, we often had this, well, we will give a better experience to IE9. Whilst lots of other browser vendors at the time were even locking people out of experiences, we were saying, well, we'll try and do one better. We'll try and make sure that people aren't locked out, but we'll your up little things to say your experience is better in IE9, which personally I think's rubbish. Like, no one should be told what browser to use, and no one should have it as a pop-up in their face. But I think we learned a lot from those first implementations about how we did and how we went about things. We were thinking, we were brainstorming about what maybe Murdoch, and Murdoch's this character in the Gorillas. If you don't know the Gorillas, they're a cartoon animated band. What they would do in the HTML5 experiences, or what they could do in the video which accompanied IE9 Release. And one of the ideas was that, have anyone seen those Windows 8-second windows? Has anyone seen those adverts on TV? Well, basically, there's one advert where this guy says, you can use in-private browsing to buy an engagement ring. And everyone's got in the back of their mind, like, an engagement ring? Like, you're hiding that? You're probably hiding something a little bit more serious, maybe? So we were basically going to go and explore Murdoch's browsing history in 8 seconds and a real use for in-private browsing. But for some reason, the marketing team and PR team didn't like it. So we dropped that idea. So the beta went ahead, and it was pretty successful in terms of downloads, and we got a lot of positive reaction from all sorts of people, all sorts of places, from standards bodies, other browser manufacturers who are actually, to my surprise, much more accepting of what we were doing than I ever kind of thought. Obviously, we're all in competition with each other, but it kind of is quite humbling when people will say, you know, all right, maybe you're not as good as us, but you're coming along, or you're doing things in the right way, you're going in the right direction. I think that's a really positive thing that I kind of take from my experience. And I think I recently got asked to speak at an event called Browser Wars, and it kind of upset me a little bit, the idea that we're still in war. I don't think it's like the Netscape days. I think people are a little bit more educated and a little bit more mature and realise that different browsers, different operating systems, people need choice and shouldn't be forced into what browser they use. So Platform Preview 6, we introduced CSS3 2D transforms and HTML5 semantic tags. You'd have thought semantic tags would be the first thing we did, but actually the release schedule isn't always the most obvious or the easiest. It's the thing which we think is going to add most value to our users. So for some reason, audio and HTML video and Canvas came first. Platform Preview 7 was all about JavaScript performance. And again, I say WebKit, SunSpider, benchmarks. We used to be 4th or 3rd on these charts, and everyone would go, yeah, but you're 4th or 3rd, so you can't really say they're not important. And when we came first, everyone said, well, this isn't an important job benchmark, and you're probably cheating anyway, the way you're doing it. But I think regardless of whether you say that the way that we do things would be cheating or whatnot, what it generally shows is there's a gradual improvement of JavaScript engines to the point where they're very, very small now. And some people dismiss this and say, well, it doesn't really matter now. We're all very, very small, very, very close, within a blink of an eye. But actually, it does really matter, because as applications get more and more complex, this needs to go down even further. JavaScript needs to improve further and further. And I think actually stuff like this, although it doesn't really show how fast a JavaScript engine is, or even how fast the web can be, or all the different subsystems which actually make the perception of a website faster, it is an important thing that we should all be concentrating on making faster. Microsoft will put these things out and show we're number one, or make these tests available and then say, but they don't matter. You know, it's all about rendering. It's all about CSS parsing and HTML parsing and all these other things which make the experience faster. Take it with a pinch of salt. And then we have the release just before our actual full release. And here we implemented geolocation. Again, something which people didn't expect us to put in, but it was a really important feature for us to put in, because we knew at that time that we were going to put IE9 on our phone platform. And it's all good and well putting HTML5 on the phone, but if you don't have geolocation, then it's going to be a pretty big dud of a phone platform. The interesting thing about our port from Windows 7 through to the Windows Phone 7, which is where this browser will be used, is that we're actually not making any changes to the core of the browser. So it should be the case that every feature which is in the browser should be supported in the phone, and that's kind of what we're aiming at. Is a direct port. We're not trying to make a version like or a IE9 Lite version for the phone. We're actually trying to do a direct port. So geolocation was really important to get into our desktop browser so that we would have a similar experience on our phone platform as well. We added things like tracking protection, which we built and then took to the standards bodies and said we should standardize this. And obviously lots of work's done with Mozilla and ourselves and lots of other browser vendors to go and try and make tracking protection a standard now. And I think that's driven actually by Europe. Like the fact that I think it was a case if we don't put tracking protection in, then European laws are going to give us some problems down the line. And we did some UI improvements based upon the feedback that we got in IE9 beta release, because lots of people didn't like the fact that we put the tabs next to the browser one search window. Now it's interesting when people say about the tabs, because lots of people are big users of IE9 would say to us, it's ridiculous that I can only put like 6 tabs before the names of the tabs get shortened, because they only go on one row, or they only went on one row when we first launched the browser. But it was all based upon telemetry data, which was saying on average, people only use 3 tabs at a time in internet browsers. But the problem, so on average, people only use 3 things at a time. And the problem is, though, there's use cases where people have 20 browser tabs open at a time. And I think it's a case where telemetry data gives you an average and it's not really useful. I think a guy with his head in the oven and his feet in the fridge is on average comfortable. So next up we had the IE9 release. Again, faster JavaScript. Who would have thought it? You can now pin to multiple tabs places. So we could take, we used to just be able to take the fav icon and drag it down. Now you can take any image or any specifically constructed image with JavaScript and drag it down to your taskbar, and it integrates with the operating system. Then you can use the browser to integrate with the operating system in some ways. And that's kind of been a tenet of the design of IE9, is trying to make it feel more like a native application. And we've obviously got a lot of abuse for calling it native HTML5 or those things in the press, but actually what we're trying to do is make it feel more like an application, or make the web browsing experience feel more like a native applications in terms of speed, look, and the way that users access their applications. The taskbar in Windows 7 is one of the most used features, jump list we call them, where you right-click the taskbar and it gives you a list of things that you can do or action on that application. It's one of the most used features in Windows 7, and it was something which we felt we should bring to the browser as well. And the important point here is that in our IE9 release, we'd addressed 17,000 external reported bugs. That's way ahead of what we did in IE8. So we could see that the actual bug reporting process had improved rapidly and greatly by our sort of insistence on going through the platform preview approach. Now, the problem with addressing bugs at the moment is you need a Hotmail Live ID or whatever to actually go and do it on Connect. And we're working, or we recognise that's a bit of a problem. We should be a bit more open about accepting bugs. But that's the way it is at the moment. Hopefully we will have something which is a bit better for that, but there's no specific announcements around that at the moment. And so we launched www.beautyoftheweb.co.uk. It's where you can pick up a version of IE9 today. Please don't use http://getie9.com, because although this is quite funny, my boss didn't find it very funny. That will take you to Google Chrome's homepage. I spoke to the guy when this happened. Like it was going on the Twitch streams. I was thinking, Jesus, some people which I wouldn't expect to be promoting IE9 are all, sending people over to this getie9.com. This is amazing. We're having massive uptake. only to realise that I was a dumb dipshit. So I approached the guy and said, like the guy owner of this domain, he'd had it for ages, not just specifically for our launch. And I said to him, like, could we buy it from you? Like, how much would it cost? And then he goes, like, I'm not in it for the money. I wasn't trying to do it for any sort of stunt. And I think he was probably willing to just give it to us, and we just said, well, actually, I think we'll just leave it. The kind of damage has maybe done a little bit of what it can do. And actually, I think it still is quite a bit of fun, you know. Do you know, that's actually interesting. You know, one of the biggest problems we had reported. I know that's just a joke, but actually, people which aren't on the meme might actually think that was real, because one of the biggest reports we had was YouTube. If you went to YouTube in the HTML5 version in IE9 and you right-clicked and you said download film, it would rickroll you, so it would download Rick Astley's video rather than the video you were watching as a bit of a joke. And we got that reported loads of times as like a real bug. Like IE9 can't download the correct video. So we spoke to Google and said, please correct that for us. My brother's just come in. Hello.
I've been here a while.
Oh, good man. So anyway, I know what you're thinking. Microsoft have developed a standard-based browser. Things have changed a lot since even just the 1 year that I've worked at Microsoft, things have changed an awful lot. And I know that it's difficult to believe that we've changed as a company. I know everyone expects us to be kind of evil again or deliver another really crap browser, but we're not. We're on course for delivering a really decent browser with IE9. We've delivered a decent browser with IE9, and I think we're on course to deliver even a better experience in IE10. So, one thing you won't see in my demos is any comparisons with other browsers to show you how good our rendering is against theirs. And I think the real win for IE9 and the real win for the browser community as a whole is the similarities that we now have rather than the differences. The fact that you can code, and it will work in IE9, it will work in Chrome, it will work in Firefox, Safari, Opera. It's these edge cases still where there's differences and things that we need to work on, but the core experience of surfing the web in IE9 is a much more standards-based, interoperable, better all-round experience. So just quickly, I want to talk a little bit about our future. We're going to follow the same pattern of release cycle as we did for IE9, which is every 8 to now 12 weeks, because before it was actually every 8 weeks. But now every 8 to 12 weeks, we're going to release a version of Internet Explorer 10 as a platform preview. And really, you can expect to see more use of the actual underlying pieces. When's the first one out? The first one came out, past tense, came out in April this year. We announced it at Mix 2 weeks after we released IE9. And one of the things that we were really conscious of, that people were going to say, they've done IE9, they've kind of tipped their hat towards HTML5 and CSS3, and then they're going to quit for another 3 years and leave us in the lurch again. Well, what we want to say is that we're here to stay. We think it's working for us in terms of getting people to consider or test for IE. It's a really great thing to be working for a team which is actually being relatively successful, whereas I wouldn't have wanted to be on the IE8 team or the IE7 team doing the same job as I'm doing today. I'm not saying things are perfect, but I'm saying that probably if we involved more people and we spoke to more people and we got more feedback, so people like you not knowing that the IE10 platform preview out is a great example of, I need to do more of this and try and speak to people and explain that IE10's out, and the best time to affect this is now. The best time to affect the change for IE10 is today. And if you can download IE10 if your system's capable of using it, and test for it, and make sure that if you find any bugs, you report them early, then we're more likely to build a standards-based browser which actually works for everybody. And that's really the situation that I want to get to. Also, just to mention, we have the things that we released in IE10 were CSS3 multi-column layout, grid layout, flexible box layout, CSS3 gradients, and ECMAScript 5 strict mode. Now, you'll notice if you go to one of the test suites for ECMA 5 and say, is it strict? This is what I went to on IE9. You can't really see it. This is a sea of green and red, all the different browsers reported. And it shows the this browser, yes, 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 it has ECMA everything apart from strict mode. And that's really important, because we say it supports strict mode. So I was a little bit concerned when I went to this site. But if you actually look and you dig into it, what you'll notice is we actually do support everything which is in the standard for strict modes. The thing which we're red on is something which is non-standard, i.e. not part of the ECMA 265 standard. So although that's sometimes it can be kind of misleading, these charts and stuff. And I know they're kind of, the ones we produce and the ones everyone produces sometimes are there to, you know, help us all move forward. But like something like that can make people think, why? They're saying ECMA 5 and then it's not supported. It's not a good thing for anyone. So with that, I'd just like to thank you for listening to me. And of course, if you wouldn't mind following me on Twitter, that would be great. Thank you very much. Cheers. Has anyone got any questions? I thought you might. Somehow I thought.
I have a question from the browser event. So the top question we had was, what would you like to see from the other browsers in your browser? And I believe you answered that the other day over Twitter.
Did I? I don't think I answered that one. I'm not sure I did.
So that was a
but I'll answer it.
So.
Personally, I would be interested to see how we could do an update mechanism like other browsers do. But I recognise the issues with implementing something like that for us, because with the update specifically, we have lots of enterprise customers who like versions of software so that they can be sure that their applications work. And if you put sort of Google Chrome into an enterprise, generally the first thing you switch off is its auto-updating feature. So I'd like to see if we could think around how we deliver that, or maybe if we could improve the speed at which we deliver through the current updating mechanism for IE, which is Windows Update. Windows Update, by the way, updates every other Tuesday. We send out updates, thousands of updates for our operating system every other Tuesday. We don't send that many updates for IE. And I think that's a sort of a missed opportunity. Maybe actually the updating process. Sorry?
They're only supposed to be bug fixes, though, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So we've never added a feature, but because I think generally speaking, we don't think maybe that we would probably break more websites than we fixed in many ways, because we don't think that developers are at the moment doing feature detection when they're developing as much as we'd like them to. There's definitely lots of people that are, but actually there's a real difficult balance of whether or not it would break more sites or would fix more sites, and that's a real difficult debate for us to have. I would actually like to see maybe some kind of updating it mechanism or improved update mechanism. So Chrome, I'll take it from there. Sorry, Peter.
Hi. First of all, I've got to say it's amazing improvement in Microsoft in the last couple of years, so massive congratulations on that.
Anything like that, I'll take that personally. Yeah. If you've got any problems, then that's probably some other guy.
You touched on it very briefly at the end there, and that IE10 is probably not, I mean, obviously IE9 is not compatible with XP, and IE10 will probably not be compatible with Vista.
Yeah.
So, aren't you worried that that's going to lead to a lot of fragmentation in the future, almost as much as we've got now with IE6 and IE7? Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sorry, because for the video. So you were saying that so IE9 doesn't support XP, and IE10 isn't going to support Vista. I think the second problem there, IE10 not supporting Vista, is not a problem. No one uses Vista, really. That was why we had such problems in the last few years. You know, anyone using Vista today should probably pay the upgrade fee to get Windows 7, because it's so much worth it.
No, I disagree. I think Microsoft should give them free software for the years.
We just spent a lot of money on Skype, okay? We can't afford that.
You could have downloaded it free.
We could have downloaded Skype for free for the video.
Vista's a great operating system. All you've got to do is switch off all the extras and tweak it down to XP.
That's called Windows 7. That's what we did.
Yeah.
I mean, the update.
I don't like to pay for upgrades.
No, and it's fair enough. And I mean, but the fact of the matter is, the actual Vista share is very small in comparison to Windows 7. We've got Windows 7 is the fastest selling operating system of all time. We sell something like 8 copies every second. We can see that it's trending massively upwards. It's a massive improvement over Vista, although I actually point out it's not that much different from a lot of the key things which we took and the stuff that we engineered in Vista. The reason we don't support it, and I just want to XP, is because of issues with security that we had implementing IE9, and also our graphics, the stuff which we do with hardware accelerated graphics. Now the fact is that IE9 isn't on XP. I don't think that's necessarily the worst thing for anyone. Like, there's still lots of browsers. If you want HTML5, there's still lots of browsers. They're just not Microsoft ones. Would I have liked to see it on XP? Probably. But can I understand why they focus more heavily on not supporting a 10-year-old browser and focusing on the current users and their current use cases? I can kind of see why they did that. And to me, had they have spent money elsewhere supporting XP, then some of those features which you see up there today would not have been able to be done in the timescales that we did. So I see it's a problem, and XP's got a really large market share, but you know, that's our strategy and that's what we went for. So that's kind of the way it works.
I suppose the confusing thing there is that you said that IE9 is designed to run on Windows 7 mobile.
Yes, it will. So IE9 will run on
Windows 7 mobile.
Why couldn't it run on XP? Because we engineered Windows 7 mobile after we engineered Windows 7. So we took a lot of the stuff, like every phone has a GPU which we can rely on the drivers. We actually write the drivers for Windows Phone 7, whereas we didn't for everything else. And one of the problems that if anyone remembers Vista when we launched it, there were an awful lot of blue screens of death with Vista. And a lot of that was because we were doing stuff with the graphic drivers that had never been done before and never been tried before. And a lot of the stuff that we're doing now with the GPU, if we tried to make it work on XP, would be a real engineering challenge. And we think that it's better for us to focus specifically on Windows rather than spreading ourselves too thin on more platforms and delivering a half-assed job.
I'd have to agree with that one, to be fair. I can't imagine Apple ever doing that. Supporting something on things, you know.
It's actually unusual, to be honest, it's unusual for Microsoft. We usually support things to death.
Yeah.
Like IE6 is supported till 2014. I know, it's I would love to drop it now. Actually, market share in the UK is currently 2.9%, and only 3 months ago it was 3.5%.
Yeah.
So IE6 is dropping. We do a lot of stuff internally which doesn't really get much press in terms of big banks and organisations. We send people over to, we send some of our Microsoft services people to try and get those sorts of big customers off of IE6.
By hacking them.
By what?
Hacking them.
Well, there's lots of ways. There's actually a product called Browsium, which was developed by the engineers which developed IE6. They left Microsoft and set up a company, and that company actually is a bit like sort of Chrome Frame, but you basically take IE9 or IE8 and add it can then support the rendering engine of IE6. So there's options for large organisations with that sort of stuff as well to get over that problem with XP and IE6. Sorry, back.
Some obviously have clients who run the kind of enterprise deployments of browsers that you talk about. If they have a large network of IE6 users, is there like a connection that can be made that a developer can put their client in touch with somebody from Microsoft to help them with that upgrade process?
So the question is there someone inside of Microsoft who will troubleshoot a client which has IE6?
No, I'm saying, say my client is, I'm building a website for, say, Goldman Sachs. They have all IE6 on them, and I'm trying to evangelize to them why they should upgrade their 10,000 machines to IE9.
Yeah.
Who do I talk to Microsoft?
You could speak to me, and I'll put you in contact with people which could help. Someone like Goldman Sachs, as you said. The question was if there was someone with a client which had a really large user base and they're all stuck on IE6. Is there someone at Microsoft that could help them migrate to a higher browser? And yes, there probably is, and yes, I can put you in contact with someone. So if any of you have big clients, I mean, we probably wouldn't be able to help with smaller clients because there are ways that people can do that through the sort of private partner program. But in terms of really large clients or big enterprises, we could probably help there. And you speak to me, and I know some people in Microsoft which could help. Any other questions?
Sort of linking to the different platforms. From the quick research I've done, that you can't actually install IE9 alongside IE8.
No.
No. In the future, would Microsoft consider, or is it too technically implausible, that we can install different versions just for the sanity of development?
So the question is, this is for the video that I'm repeating all this stuff, by the way, because I've got a little mic here. Would we ever consider sort of unhooking IE, making it more of a standalone application so that you could then run them side by side.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of something I would love. I would actually love. It would put away with a lot of headaches, but we had a bit of a court case where we agreed that Windows and IE were linked heavily together, and I think that leads a lot of the discussion around that. A lot of our European, the sort of defences that we use in the European for IE6 monopolies. So I don't really know the answer to that. Technically, I suppose it's not impossible. Of course, it's not impossible, but legally, it's a minefield. So that's as far as I know, at least. Hello, sorry. I was just looking at you, expecting you to start.
How is IE going to handle with all of the kind of IE hacks, like if IE?
Yeah, this is our biggest problem at the moment. One of the most common problems, and if I had an internet connection, I'd show you. You can go to Pizza Hut at the moment, pizzahut.com, and try and make an order with IE8. And they switch it to IE8 mode, because you can do that. You can say, render this as IE8 instead of IE9. And they've done that, so their site will support IE9. But if you switch it back to IE9 mode, and you can do this in the developer tools, by the way, if you go in there and say, IE9 mode, go to Pizza Hut, and click the browser and start an order process, a window which is the key window to make the purchasing decision doesn't pop up. And it's like, oh, that's pretty bad. Like, that gets in the way of things a little bit for a company, a big company like Pizza Hut. But if in the developer tools you change the agent string to Google Chrome and do the exact same thing in IE9 standards mode, so that same rendering engine, it will work. And what that means clearly is somewhere along the line they've done a browser detect and said, if IE don't do this crappy code. Now we're sort of more standards based, that crappy code breaks IE9 rendering.
With a follow-up, do you think you'd ever kind of, I don't know, Windows-y or something like that?
Yeah, I think, I've often thought that would be a good idea, but I've never actually asked the question or broached that question. Why don't we change the it from IE to something else? I don't know.
The hacked comments. Because they're non-standard.
The hacks comments. Yeah, I mean,
because those are non-standard. You could just not. You could drop support for them.
You could, right, but actually,
that might just work.
Yeah, maybe we would. It would work in IE9, but then it would probably fail for all the previous versions of IE.
I mean, we're not going to change it in those, but I mean for IE9.
Oh, for IE9 to just ignore them, right?
10 to just ignore those.
Even if you change the syntax of them.
Actually, there's some places which is still useful. That's still useful and still used by a lot of developers to actually. Browser detect, they do that for browser detect and to get around problems. We're still maybe with our HTML5 and CSS3 implementations. I don't think that's actually been one of the saving things of ways that we can support certain versions of IE, and it probably isn't standard, but I don't think we're likely to remove it, to be honest. Yeah, it's a good point though.
If you change it from, if it's IE, it's IE less than.
Yeah, so the quick fix is to search a code for if IE and just change it to if IE less than. If you have to use those hacks to support older browsers.
Most of those hacks would be like stuff that was coded years ago and it isn't going to get touched again.
But and the problem is that guy which developed that site might not exist. His company might exist. He might not exist physically. So we can't just do that, a big change like that, and break the web. That's the kind of the thing. It's all about not breaking the web. Sorry, yeah.
Is there a plan eventually that, like, say for example, you said the similarities are more important among our browsers now. Say on a Mac, I could just open up Chrome and Firefox.
Yeah.
But then, is there a plan that I could also do the same with IE? Or
no. When I say no, I imagine there's some Mac users with a sigh of relief, like. But no, we will never build. We used to build IE for the Mac. Version 1 was, I believe, on the Mac. Like we did it for up until about 4 or 5. 5, yeah, 5.5. Great browser. So we did it all the way up to that. So you could either like have Netscape Gold or whatever, or IE 5.5 on your Mac. But no, we've kind of why we make a browser. The fundamental reason why we make a browser is to try and improve the web experience for Windows users. And I don't think we're helping anyone trying to move to Mac. If we're going to support Mac and not XP, we'd be real idiots. So no, we.
As a front-end developer, for example.
Yeah, testing is an interesting thing. Yeah.
So much easier.
Yeah.
Yeah,
actually, I think there's ways we could mitigate that actually moving forward. I'd like to see maybe like WebDriver being introduced into IE10, or some of those. I know they're getting standardized at the moment through the W3C, or there's propositions to standardize them through the W3C. These automation, the ability to like do Selenium tests, but the WebDriver, the new versions of Selenium. I think that's probably doing that sort of stuff in the cloud is a better way than us trying to write a whole platform for Mac just so developers can test, which I respect is a decent use case for it, because some people just don't want to have a virtual machine just to run IE. So.
Even WebKit doesn't render the same on OS X.
No, and that's a real challenge. Is that those browsers do have.
We're talking about 1 pixel difference, but still it does actually count.
Well, we've all been there when that 1 pixel ruins a website. So, yeah, there's all sorts of problems there. They're different, fundamentally different beasts, and we were pretty much concentrating on Windows for the time being. Sorry, yes.
So when's IE10 out?
Oh, if only I knew. All I know is that we are we're constantly working on it, and we'll constantly be updating with progress. I don't know. I really don't know.
But I mean, are we talking next year?
Oh, we're talking. I think my humble opinion is we're going to be doing it as fast as we can. We know that we've got a reputation of doing it too slowly, but I actually don't know. So my gut is that we were going to do it very quickly, or we're going to do it much, much faster than perhaps we've previously done with browsers. But actually, it will all depend on the alignment of. We've got a big operating system release that might happen sometime in the future. So, what does that say? The stars, yeah. That's how we plan software at Microsoft. The stars, yeah. Well, if they align, we shall produce. No, but I really, honestly don't know, and I'd be guessing.
Didn't the Chandler say 2012?
I didn't get the memo, but he might have. He might have said that. I don't know. I'd love, if that's the case, that'd be great, right? But I don't know. If Dean Harkamovich said 2012, then he is the highest of high in IE9. IE, he's the demigod.
IE9 for Win Phone is coming out this year, they've said that.
Yeah, absolutely. So IE9 for Windows Phone 7 is coming out this year. Yes, later on in the year.
Make it useful.
Yes, and supporting many new features. Yeah. Sorry, one other question.
What's the most surprising thing that you've had suggested for the next release?
The most surprising thing?
Internally, I mean, not.
Oh, God knows. See, this is the thing. People think that Microsoft is. I think we sometimes have these blog posts which go out, and it's like the message, the one true message. And our PR department probably love that idea that we have one true message. But actually, if you dig a little deeper, we have 80,000 employees over thousands of countries all around the world, different age ranges, different backgrounds. If you have an opinion about Microsoft, you can almost guarantee that opinion exists inside of Microsoft as well. So we will have everything you can well imagine will probably have been suggested to us or by us at some stage. But I'm not going to grass anyone up. I don't want to get fired. I don't want to get anyone else fired either. But yeah, and every opinion that you could probably come up with, even an opinion of maybe we should just use Linux, like those sorts of opinions can come up occasionally. There are a breadth of opinions, so it's crazy. Yeah. Any other questions, or do we have time? Oh, one more question. Yeah.
How many people would you say have been behind delivering IE9? How many people?
Oh, do you know what? I am really annoyed that they won't tell me. I asked them for a picture. Yeah. Just really bloody busy. I don't think it's as big as sometimes we imagine. There's lots of people involved in IE. And you can see on the MSDN sites when you look at like the JavaScript teams and stuff, it's a handful of people. It's not thousands or hundreds. It's similar to other browser manufacturers, but we don't give numbers, and we don't actually, for some really weird reason, we don't show pictures of our people, our developers. Although they're quite happy to plaster my picture over the bloody internet, but they won't do it for everyone else. So.
Do you have it as a product, as a department?
IE, yeah, it's its own. It's actually it belongs to Windows, so it reports up to Dean Harkamovich, reports up to. I think directly to Steve Ballmer, but it's the Windows division. So the IE9 team belongs to Windows, the Windows division.
How did the tradition of sending the cake to Firefox team come about?
Because someone had a good sense of humor in our engineering team. I think that's often missed as well. Like the engineers at Microsoft are really good people. They're really good quality engineers, and they've probably got a sense of humor. So it was always a good thing, and I think we should do more of it. There's a guy, Rob Hawkes, spoke here last week. I've actually promised to buy him, because I was speaking to him before he became a Mozilla evangelist, and I've promised to buy him a dinosaur cake. So next week on the 23rd, when he comes to our Critters party, which is I work for a website called ubelly.com. It's the official, unofficial Microsoft blog. And we're having a party next week, or the 25th, I believe. Rob's coming along to that because he's nominated as the next big thing. Yeah, I will deliver a dinosaur cake then, hopefully.
Why do you send the cakes to Opera and Chrome as well?
I think maybe because it was kind of, there was a bit of banter. It's just a bit of banter. There's nothing, and it wasn't our PR departments. It was dev engineers. Yeah. Sorry.
I have a cake.
Yeah, be as awesome as Rob Hawks, and I'll give you a cake. So.
Do they cook the cake themselves?
Jesus Christ. There is internally a recipe. I'll send it to you. So yeah.
On that, we have to end and stop.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Beer.